Early December 1943, Cairo, Egypt. The pen trembled slightly as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt bent toward the paper, preparing to inscribe words that would forever reshape the trajectory of modern warfare. Harry Hopkins, his trusted aide, had just emerged from a pivotal meeting with General George C. Marshall, the figure everyone in Washington had assumed would command the most ambitious military undertaking the world had ever witnessed. Yet Roosevelt found himself wrestling with a thought that had consumed him night after night, making sleep nearly impossible. I cannot sleep at night with him out of Washington. The moment had arrived. Within minutes, a decision would be rendered that would bench America's most audacious combat commander, while elevating a consummate organizer who had never directed troops in actual warfare to lead the invasion of Europe. Neither man in that room could have foreseen that this choice would fundamentally alter not only how military command functioned, but what the world would come to understand as leadership itself. Supreme command, it turned out, would be calculated not through battlefield victories, but through the intricate choreography of logistics and coordination, a form of mastery that would ultimately prove more consequential than any single general's tactical brilliance. The path to this crossroads stretched back to May 1943, when the Tunisian campaign concluded with roughly 267,000 Axis soldiers laying down their weapons in North Africa. Among the American commanders who had earned distinction in that victory stood Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., a name that already sent shivers through German military circles. At 57, Patton embodied the very image Americans conjured when imagining a warrior in its truest form. His uniforms were custom-tailored, pristine, adorned with brass that caught the desert light and reflected it back like captured fire. 2 revolvers with ivory handles rested at his sides, not mere ornament, but genuine instruments of lethal skill he had mastered thoroughly. His language could make hardened seamen wince, his moods could paralyze his officers with dread, and his gift for warfare could dismantle opposing armies with a velocity that shattered every textbook principle of military science. Patton's ascent to prominence had begun generations earlier. Born November 11, 1885, in San Gabriel, California, into a lineage steeped in military service, young George absorbed tales of forebears who had shed blood in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War alike. His grandfather, a Confederate colonel, had fallen at the Third Battle of Winchester, his name carved into family memory alongside his sacrifice. This inheritance became woven into Patton's very being from his earliest years. He battled dyslexia, a condition the era neither named nor understood, turning academic study into a grinding struggle. Yet he countered this disability through sheer willpower and an almost obsessive drive to overcome every obstacle placed before him. He spent a single year at Virginia Military Institute before entering West Point in 1904. Academic challenges required him to repeat his freshman year, but when he finally departed the academy on June 11, 1909, he ranked 46th among his 103 classmates. Even then, his relentless competitive fire and aggressive temperament distinguished him starkly from his peers. Following his commissioning, Patton's career took an extraordinary detour when he represented the United States in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, competing in the modern pentathlon. He placed 5th despite what numerous observers believed was an unjustly low pistol score. This brush with international athletic competition deepened his conviction that personal excellence mattered above all else, and that America required warriors capable of standing alongside any opponent on earth. Athletic achievement, married to his family's social standing through his union with Beatrice Eyre, daughter of a prosperous Massachusetts industrialist, furnished him with connections and resources that propelled his military trajectory upward. Patton encountered actual combat for the first time in 1916 during the Pershing expedition into Mexico in pursuit of Pancho Villa, serving as aide to Brigadier General John J. Pershing. The young officer orchestrated a motorized assault against Villa's followers that ended in 3 deaths among the guerrillas, including one of Villa's captains. Patton himself drew his revolvers and fired, then arranged the bodies across the hoods of his vehicles and drove back to present his grim trophies to headquarters. This episode, striking and violent, captured national newspaper headlines that dubbed him the first American officer to employ motor vehicles in combat operations. Yet this moment's true significance lay in cementing his alliance with Pershing, a bond that would shelter and advance his career for decades to come. When the United States joined World War I in 1917, Patton sailed to France at Pershing's side. There, immersed in the chaos of modern industrial warfare, he found his true purpose: armored combat. Tanks represented a revolutionary technology, temperamental and prone to mechanical failure. Yet Patton grasped immediately what they could accomplish. He founded the United States Tank School at Langeras, France, personally fashioning the doctrine and procedures that would guide training. He absorbed French tank methodology, questioned British tank commanders, and forged distinctly American approaches centered on velocity and relentless aggression. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive in September 1918, Patton commanded the newly assembled tank corps into battle. Machine gun fire struck him as he advanced on foot alongside his tanks, an injury that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross and burnished his reputation as a leader willing to expose himself to enemy fire. When peace returned, Patton emerged as one of the American Army's strongest voices for mechanized warfare. Throughout the 20s and 30s, he authored articles, ran experiments, and advocated with unceasing intensity that future conflicts would be determined by swift-moving armored formations. He partnered with Major Dwight Eisenhower, whom he had encountered in 1919 during tank development discussions. Though their personalities diverged sharply, both envisioned mechanized warfare in a way Army leadership deemed prohibitively expensive and dangerously unproven. Money remained scarce and thinking remained traditional, consigning tanks to roles supporting infantry. Yet Patton pressed forward relentlessly, designing the M1913 cavalry saber and composing extensive treatises on mounted tactics, perpetually searching for methods to preserve aggressive mobility in contemporary warfare. By 1940, as conflict consumed Europe, Patton's era had finally dawned. He received promotion to brigadier general in October 1940, assuming command of an armored brigade and commencing the instruction of soldiers in the combative methods he had championed for 2 decades. He established the Desert Training Center across California's Mojave landscape, constructing an enormous complex where American troops absorbed how to wage war amid conditions mirroring North Africa. His instruction proved brutal, his expectations austere, yet soldiers completing his preparation became among the Army's most lethal fighting forces. When Operation Torch commenced in November 1942, Patton led the Western Task Force, putting 35,000 men ashore along the Moroccan coast in America's opening major strike against Axis powers. The Moroccan operation displayed Patton's capabilities in full measure. Despite resistance from Vichy French defenders, violent seas, and logistical complications, Patton's soldiers secured their positions and drove inland. Casablanca capitulated within 72 hours. The Sultan of Morocco, moved by Patton's soldierly presence and battlefield success, bestowed upon him the Order of Wissam Alawi, the accompanying citation written in French. The lions in their dens tremble at his approach. More significantly, Patton demonstrated that American fighting men could orchestrate intricate amphibious assaults and vanquish formidable opposition. His triumph earned him elevation to lieutenant general and expanded accountability throughout the North African theater. When American troops absorbed a catastrophic reversal at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, the call went out for Patton to restore fighting spirit and order. The engagement had constituted a genuine calamity. German forces under Marshal Erwin Rommel had shattered through American positions, leaving over 6,000 American casualties and annihilating or seizing substantial quantities of equipment and vehicles. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, commanding the Second Corps, had proven unequal to the challenge. On March 6, 1943, Patton stepped into Fredendall's position and commenced a complete transformation of the demoralized formation. He decreed stringent appearance standards, mandating that every soldier maintain complete uniform and helmet at every hour, even in rear areas. He implemented demanding work schedules and regular inspections. He journeyed ceaselessly across his command, engaging soldiers in conversation, scrutinizing equipment, assessing positions. He pushed for constant aggressive reconnaissance and offensive posture, even while defending. Within days, the alteration became unmistakable. Soldiers carried themselves with heightened bearing, answered commands with sharper precision, fought with greater intensity. Patton elevated Major General Omar Bradley into his subordinate role, recognizing in Bradley a steady dependability that perfectly balanced his own fiery temperament. Through their combined efforts, Second Corps emerged anew as a capable, efficient instrument. When American forces confronted the Germans again at Gafsa in late March 1943, they maintained their positions and mounted successful counterattacks. Patton had demonstrated beyond question that American servicemen could match German professionals if administered rigorous instruction, rigid discipline, and forceful direction. This accomplishment vindicated his approach and solidified his standing as one of America's premier battlefield commanders. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 burnished Patton's reputation further, while simultaneously generating the episode that would transform his career's trajectory forever. Operation Husky, the assault on Sicily, saw Patton commanding the 7th Army with 90,000 landing across the island's southern coast on July 10, 1943. His assignment was supposedly to safeguard the eastern flank of British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army as it pushed northward toward Messina. But Patton harbored no inclination to assume a supporting function beneath the British general. When Montgomery's drive encountered fierce resistance near Catania, Patton detected an opening. He unleashed a whirlwind offensive westward across Sicily, seizing Palermo on July 22 through a torrential advance that astounded allies and adversaries alike. Subsequently, he swung his divisions eastward, propelling them along Sicily's northern frontier toward Messina in a fierce struggle with Montgomery for the prize. The contest transformed into something personal, with each commander driving his soldiers forward with intensifying pressure to grasp the port first. Patton prevailed, reaching Messina on August 17, 1943, crossing the finish line several hours ahead of Montgomery. The strategic worth of his achievement remained contested, with detractors suggesting he had pursued personal triumph at the cost of encircling German formations. Yet his reputation as a fearless, determined commander who accomplished feats others deemed impossible had been forged indelibly. Sicily's conquest required 38 days, with combined Allied casualties reaching roughly 24,850. The campaign extracted Italy from the war and unsealed the Mediterranean for Allied vessels. Yet within this military success erupted the episodes that would overshadow Patton's accomplishments and redirect his entire future. On August 3, 1943, Patton walked through the 15 evacuation hospital situated close to Nicosia. Touring the wards, he came upon Private Charles H. Cool, a 26-year-old from Indiana, admitted under the medical classification of battle fatigue or combat exhaustion. Medically, the soldier displayed no external injury. Patton, who interpreted such diagnoses as evidence of cowardice, pressed for explanation of the man's ailment. Upon learning the soldier experienced nervousness under artillery bombardment, Patton's restraint evaporated. He struck Cool's face with his gloves, branded him a coward, and commanded immediate return to fighting positions. The attending medical personnel stood stunned, though accounts of the confrontation traveled through medical reporting channels and stayed contained initially. 9 days later, on August 10th, Patton arrived at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital. He encountered 21-year-old Private Paul G. Bennett, similarly diagnosed with battle fatigue. Bennett possessed 4 years of combat service behind him, but had reached his psychological limit. When Patton demanded details and Bennett admitted he couldn't face further combat, Patton's fury surpassed even his previous explosion. He struck Bennett twice, the second blow so violent Bennett's helmet flew free. Then Patton withdrew one of his revolvers, brandished it toward Bennett's skull, and articulated explicit threats to execute him for cowardice. He subjected Bennett to repeated accusations of weakness, then commanded hospital workers to send the soldier back to battle or face military charges themselves. Medical personnel witnessing the exchange recoiled in horror, and several produced detailed documentation of the general's conduct. These documents traversed channels toward General Omar Bradley, currently commanding the Second Corps, who sequestered them in his personal safe out of personal loyalty to his former superior. Nevertheless, separate reports coursed through medical administration into the Surgeon General's headquarters, traveling upward until they reached General Dwight Eisenhower's attention on August 16th. Eisenhower confronted an excruciating dilemma. Patton stood as arguably the most accomplished battlefield commander the Allies possessed, a warrior whose tactical genius and combative instinct seemed irreplaceable for forthcoming operations. Yet he had attacked enlisted men, made explicit threats of execution for a soldier, and transgressed both military statute and fundamental standards of human treatment. The incidents laid bare a character vulnerability, a catastrophic inability to govern his rage that prompted grave concerns regarding his suitability for supreme command. Eisenhower pursued a calculated course of action. He composed a blistering reply dated August 17th, acknowledging that firm leadership occasionally proved warranted. This does not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates. Eisenhower mandated that Patton personally apologize to both attacked soldiers, to the medical personnel who bore witness to the violence, and to every division within his army. Patton submitted to the demand, though his apologies cost him considerably in pride and humiliation. He journeyed to each division, confessed his behavior was unjustifiable, and implored their understanding. Numerous soldiers responded favorably to his willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing. Others felt their confidence had been permanently fractured. Yet the affair remained shielded from public knowledge until November 21, 1943, when journalist Drew Pearson broadcast the slapping incidents across the radio to the entire American populace. The eruption of response proved immediate and fractious. Certain Americans defended Patton, contending that warfare necessitated harsh commanders intolerant of perceived weakness. Many others experienced revulsion, interpreting the slappings as demonstration of cruelty and unsuitability for power. Congressional representatives demanded accountability. War Secretary Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall faced mounting demands to either champion Patton or remove him from authority entirely. The firestorm intensified precisely as the war's most consequential appointment was being finalized. This appointment encompassed not merely Patton, but two additional remarkable commanders whose professional trajectories had diverged dramatically. Dwight David Eisenhower had entered the world on October 14, 1890, in Denison, Texas, into a family of limited resources. His father toiled as a mechanic, employed at a dairy processing plant, and Dwight's childhood unfolded in Abilene, Kansas. His beginnings bore no resemblance to Patton's privileged station. Eisenhower entered West Point, not primarily from burning military ambition, but for the educational opportunity offered without charge. He finished on June 12, 1915, placing 61st within a graduating cohort of 164 cadets. That class, eventually christened the class the stars fell on, would generate 59 general officers, though in that moment Eisenhower appeared an improbable contender for prominence. Eisenhower's early years carried the weight of disappointment. When America mobilized for World War I, he yearned desperately for battlefield assignment, yet the military assigned him to establish and operate tank instruction at Camp Colt in Pennsylvania. He excelled extraordinarily at instruction and logistical administration, designing an effective tank facility that equipped thousands for overseas deployment. Yet he remained stateside himself. Hostilities concluded before his transport occurred, leaving him carrying an ache of having missed his generation's defining trial. Following the armistice, his permanent rank reverted to captain. Subsequent advancement to major proceeded glacially. During 1919, Eisenhower traveled the breadth of America as participant in the Army's transcontinental motor convoy, a 2-month expedition demonstrating the woefully inadequate state of American roadways. This journey, alongside his tank background, persuaded him that upcoming conflicts would depend upon quickly mobile mechanized forces and dependable infrastructure networks. At Fort Meade, Maryland, in 1919, he encountered Major George Patton, both then attached to tank formations. Notwithstanding their strikingly different personal styles and social circumstances, the two established genuine friendship and intellectual partnership. They engaged in extended philosophical discussions regarding armored tactics, conducted practical field trials, and composed joint treatises championing mechanized combat approaches. The men at the top remained unyielding in their allegiance to the old ways. Both officers faced considerable pushback for daring to propose such unconventional thinking. During the 20s and 30s, Eisenhower's path upward moved steadily through a succession of administrative roles that highlighted his talent for organization, while deliberately keeping him away from direct battlefield responsibility. He completed his studies at the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, finishing at the very top of his 275 officer class back in 1926. That classroom triumph caught the eye of influential commanders who recognized the value of someone skilled in planning and administrative detail. His talents attracted the notice of General John J. Pershing, for whom he worked as both speechwriter and personal assistant, contributing significantly to the general's written memoir during his final years. Under Brigadier General Fox Connor's guidance in Panama, Eisenhower gained invaluable perspective on how Allied nations fought together and learned from military history itself. Connor pulled him aside one day with a stark warning. Another global conflict was coming, and when America entered it, the nation would fight not alone but alongside other powers, probably the British and French. By 1933, Eisenhower found himself working alongside General Douglas MacArthur, who held the position of Army Chief of Staff. This partnership proved rocky and complicated. MacArthur carried himself with an air of supreme confidence, convinced without question of his own brilliance and superiority. Eisenhower, by contrast, possessed a quieter confidence and grounded practicality, and he spent much of his time defusing the tensions and disputes MacArthur generated with lawmakers and officials in the Roosevelt White House. MacArthur's assignment to the Philippines in 1935 to construct that country's military defenses meant Eisenhower went along as his deputy. Those 6 years on the islands from 1935 through 1939 proved grueling in many respects, though they offered invaluable lessons. Eisenhower learned the delicate art of diplomacy, carefully managing the intricate web connecting American military advisors, local political figures, and MacArthur's towering personality. He grasped that military success rested upon political backing, that working with partner nations demanded give and take, and that measured restraint and careful handling frequently proved more effective than direct confrontation. Returning home in 1939, Eisenhower arrived to discover that Europe was already engulfed in conflict. His advancement quickened dramatically as the armed forces desperately required capable planners to oversee the massive build-up and transition to wartime footing. Everyone noticed his gift for coordinating large efforts, his sharp mind, and his ability to maintain intense focus over extended periods. During 1941, he took part in extensive maneuvers across Louisiana that demonstrated the Army's emerging strength in mechanized warfare. His showing impressed General George C. Marshall, the Army's top commander, who was assembling a team of exceptional officers preparing for the approaching war. When Japan's forces struck Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Marshall brought Eisenhower to the capital and placed him in the war planning section. His opening responsibility entailed crafting an approach for conflict across the Pacific Theater. He burned through long hours, frequently passing out at his desk, turning out methodical, workable strategies that earned Marshall's deepest respect. By February 1942, Marshall elevated Eisenhower to direct the entire war planning section, placing him in charge of tactical thinking across every theater of operation. Eisenhower championed prioritizing Europe over the Pacific, contending that Nazi Germany represented the more serious danger and that toppling Hitler had to come first for the Allies. His precision in analysis and his capacity to maintain perspective amid countless moving pieces made him essential to Marshall's operation. Come June 1942, Marshall stationed Eisenhower in London, serving as head of all American operations throughout Europe. It represented a stunning advancement for someone lacking actual battlefield experience commanding combat soldiers. Yet Marshall sensed that Eisenhower possessed the specific talents demanded by multinational warfare. Eisenhower's charge encompassed positioning American troops across Britain, preserving the partnership with the British, and laying the groundwork for a future strike against occupied France. He demonstrated remarkable skill in building relationships with the British leadership. He formed a genuine connection with Winston Churchill, secured confidence among Britain's military commanders, and established a unified command center where British and American officers collaborated side by side. His knack for diplomacy, his readiness to give way on secondary matters while staying firm on crucial ones, and his authentic commitment to the Allied cause proved remarkably powerful. When Operation Torch commenced in November 1942, Marshall designated Eisenhower as the combined Allied commander, notwithstanding his complete lack of actual combat experience. Torch presented political entanglements, needing to work with French troops whose reliability remained questionable while managing British and American forces whose strategic visions pointed in different ways. Eisenhower navigated the political obstacles with exceptional judgment, arranging agreements with French military figures, managing the tense circumstances involving Admiral François Darlan, and holding Allied attention fixed on the German enemy. The operation ultimately triumphed, and Eisenhower's standing climbed further. He had shown he could lead a multinational force through actual warfare, even though he personally had never commanded infantrymen under fire. The third individual whose role proved essential to this choice was George Catlett Marshall, born on the final day of 1880 in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Marshall descended from a line with Southern sympathies, his father having been a merchant in Virginia prior to settling in Pennsylvania. As a young man, George attended Virginia Military Institute, earning his commission as first captain of the Cadet Corps when he graduated in 1901. He received a second lieutenant's rank in the Infantry Corps and invested the subsequent 15 years building expertise through assorted postings that readied him for positions of authority, even though few recognized his extraordinary potential. Marshall's opening moment of real prominence arrived during the First World War, when he held a planning role with the opening infantry division operating in France. He revealed remarkable genius in organizing movement and supplying forces, particularly when arranging the complicated shifting of massive formations during intricate campaigns. During the Battle of Cantigny in May 1918, America's opening major assault, Marshall's meticulous attention to detail in the planning phase supported the outcome. Throughout the Meuse-Argonne push, he orchestrated the repositioning of more than 500,000 soldiers and nearly 3,000 artillery pieces, possibly the most extensive military repositioning ever attempted. General John J. Pershing saw Marshall's capabilities and kept him at his side as head of operations, granting him responsibilities exceeding what his official position normally permitted. Following the armistice, Marshall navigated 2 decades of various roles that strengthened his standing within military circles, while remaining anonymous in the wider culture. He served in supporting roles under Pershing, instructed officers at the training facility at Fort Benning, where he molded generations of officers who would later lead in the coming war, and held multiple positions in military administration that exhibited his talent for structuring large-scale operations. His uprightness, his sound judgment, and his gift for spotting promising military talent earned universal admiration. He maintained a little notebook where he documented the names of military officers showing potential, a collection from which numerous World War II commanders would eventually emerge. Future commanders such as Omar Bradley, Matthew Ridgway, Joseph Stilwell, and Dwight Eisenhower all came within Marshall's orbit years before the world recognized their names. In 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt made an unprecedented choice to elevate Marshall ahead of many more senior candidates and name him as the Army's commanding officer. Roosevelt grasped that the approaching war would demand not simply a battlefield commander, but an organizational mastermind capable of managing relations with Capitol Hill, orchestrating an enormous military expansion, and cooperating with foreign nations. Marshall assumed his role on September 1, 1939, on the precise day that Germany's forces crossed into Poland. The historical moment could not have been more critical. The American military at that juncture consisted of roughly 174,000 troops, putting it 17th globally and smaller than the Belgian armed forces. The troops lacked adequate gear, received insufficient preparation, and reflected an organizational structure designed for conflicts that no longer existed. Over the following 6 years, Marshall fundamentally rebuilt the American armed forces through political acumen, administrative brilliance, and sheer force of determination. He fostered strong connections with Congress, providing frequent and truthful assessments of the military's requirements. He secured enormous funding for expansion, equipment procurement, and soldier preparation. He developed new preparation bases throughout the nation, assembled new military units, and managed the recruitment and preparation of countless servicemen. He moved talented commanders forward ahead of their peers when needed to position the most capable in critical positions. He worked across service lines, handling competition between Army and Navy interests. He managed intricate dealings with demanding Allied commanders, most notably Churchill, whose military approach regularly conflicted with America's plans. Perhaps most significantly for the war's conclusion, Marshall championed the notion of a cross-channel thrust into France. From 1942 forward, he argued forcefully for a head-on confrontation with German-held territory in France as the quickest means to destroy Hitler's regime. Churchill advocated for an alternative method, advancing through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and toward the Balkans, what he termed Europe's accessible vulnerable side. Marshall rejected this reasoning as militarily flawed, contending it would deplete supplies required for the primary objective while extending the conflict unnecessarily. He contested within the American establishment, with naval leadership seeking expanded funding for Pacific operations. He disputed with British military authorities still haunted by the terrible losses from the previous world conflict and terrified of another devastating confrontation in France. He ultimately obtained Roosevelt's agreement for a channel crossing in 1943, establishing May 1944 as the launch date for the undertaking labeled Overlord. Having devised the undertaking, lobbied ceaselessly for its acceptance, and ultimately won Roosevelt's backing, Marshall appeared to be the inevitable selection for command. He commanded the most admiration of any American military figure. Churchill referred to him as the force behind Allied triumph. Stalin had regard for him. Roosevelt depended on him completely. The British would have consented to his leadership of the combined forces, regardless of their inclination for one of their own. Pershing, advanced in years but still sharp, contacted Roosevelt advocating for Marshall's selection. Legislators assumed it would occur. Military scholars predicted it. Marshall himself, conversely, made no effort to secure this honor. When questioned about what he preferred, he constantly asserted that such determinations belonged to the chief executive in accordance with national interests, not personal advancement. Roosevelt confronted a difficult dilemma. Marshall merited the appointment. His military concepts had determined Allied approach. His administrative abilities had no equal, yet Marshall's importance in the American capital could not be overlooked. He oversaw the coordination of military action, spanning various regions and fronts. He sustained Congress's backing, guaranteeing money continued flowing in. He communicated with British commanders, the Navy leadership, and contentious figures, including MacArthur, managing the Asian campaign. He kept in motion the production systems supplying implements of warfare and provisions. Admiral Ernest King and Admiral William Leahy, participants in the Military Leadership Council, firmly rejected the concept of relocating Marshall, maintaining that no one else could satisfy his current requirements. The gatherings in Cairo and Tehran during the closing months of 1943 pressured Roosevelt into deciding. Stalin wanted clarity regarding who would helm Overlord, harboring doubts about delays and wanting assurance that the assault would materialize. Churchill backed Marshall, though he privately fretted about the absence of such a gifted collaborator. Roosevelt wrestled with his decision, pulled between honoring Marshall's accomplishments and maintaining his indispensable position in the American government. During December's opening week, Roosevelt dispatched Harry Hopkins to meet Marshall in Cairo to ascertain his inclinations. Marshall would not disclose his wishes, maintaining that he would embrace whichever choice Roosevelt determined was correct. Roosevelt arranged a confidential conversation with Marshall on December 5, 1943. In Marshall's later account of the meeting, Roosevelt, following some initial uncertainty, posed the direct question of what Marshall himself wanted. Marshall offered the identical response. Personal considerations held no weight when the nation's welfare superseded individual desires. Roosevelt's reported reaction was simple. "I feel I could not sleep at night with you out of the country." The determination had been settled. Marshall would continue directing military operations from Washington to oversee the war across all theaters. The responsibility for Overlord would fall to another. On December 7, 1943, marking exactly 2 years after the Pearl Harbor assault, Roosevelt communicated Eisenhower's selection. The announcement came through in Roosevelt's characteristic style, brief and conversational. "Well, Ike, you are going to command Overlord." Eisenhower's reaction was one of pure astonishment. He had counted on Marshall obtaining the position and had begun making arrangements to move to Washington to assume Marshall's duties as the Army's executive officer. Instead, he suddenly held the greatest military challenge imaginable. That day, Marshall penned a brief message to Stalin and Churchill, conveying word of Eisenhower's designation. He included a copy for Eisenhower, accompanied by a handwritten message of his own. "Dear Eisenhower, I thought you might like to have this as a memento. It was written very hurriedly by me as the final meeting broke up yesterday. The President signing it immediately. GCM. The option turned out to be astute when its reasoning came into focus. Overlord represented far more than a battlefield tactical exercise demanding military genius. It constituted the most demanding organizational undertaking in military annals, calling for the merging of military formations from numerous countries possessing distinct command frameworks, varying military aims, and different ways of fighting. This campaign would mobilize upward of 3 million military personnel, approaching 7,000 watercraft, more than 11,000 aircraft, and an array of supplementary capabilities. Accomplishment hinged on diplomatic prowess in negotiating the complex terrain of coalition administration, organizational competency in orchestrating intricate troop movements, military comprehension encompassing how localized operations functioned within broader strategic designs, and the talent to coordinate warriors from disparate nations into one effective force. Eisenhower brought precisely these capabilities to the role. His inherent personality drew universal affection. Soldiers from Britain respected him deeply. Churchill valued him, notwithstanding periodic friction. Even Charles de Gaulle, famously cantankerous and distrustful of American and British designs, regarded Eisenhower with acceptance. Eisenhower's operational thinking encompassed more than military maneuvers. It incorporated geopolitical dimensions, financial factors, civil governance, and mass opinion. He comprehended that warfare in the contemporary era transcended pure military strategy. He had shown during the North African and Sicilian campaigns that he possessed the capability to handle complicated multinational operations in genuine conflict environments. Significantly, he cultivated a command approach that made subordinates feel acknowledged and esteemed while maintaining supreme command authority. He welcomed input from others, owned his mistakes, and continuously grew from encounters. These characteristics suited him perfectly for the top role in commanding an alliance where coordinated effort superseded tactical expertise. Upon establishing his command post in London in January 1944, Eisenhower immediately encountered obstacles that justified Roosevelt's thinking. The earliest difficulty concerned the organization of commands. The framework created earlier by British officer Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan proposed 3 divisions striking at a narrow coastal section. After studying the blueprint, Eisenhower recognized it suffered from critical shortcomings. He demanded increasing to 5 divisions positioned across a wider stretch of shoreline, enabling greater tactical flexibility and diminishing the probability of German success in mounting a counteroffensive. Achieving this expansion demanded supplementary assault vessels, intensified air operations, and enhanced resource supplies, all items facing serious constraints. Eisenhower had to persuade Churchill, the Military Steering Committee, and naval authorities to furnish the supplementary materials required for the enlarged assault. His persuasiveness, combined with sound arguments, secured consensus for the enhanced operation. The subsequent hurdle centered on which officers would oversee ground operations. British General Bernard Montgomery stepped into operational command of all ground forces when the invasion launched, overseeing both British and American armies in those critical opening hours. The arrangement satisfied London, but generated friction among some American commanders who saw Montgomery as cautious, perhaps overly deliberate, and possessed of an unfortunate arrogance. Eisenhower navigated these tensions by establishing clear boundaries for everyone's authority. Montgomery would run the landing itself and the immediate phase that followed, but Eisenhower had already decided that American commanders would assume control once forces broke out from the beaches and mobile warfare began. This required constant attention. Eisenhower managed the personality conflicts, absorbed the criticism directed at him, and kept the coalition functioning smoothly despite these pressures. Then came the third and most vexing challenge, one that demanded delicate handling: General George Patton. The slapping incidents remained fresh in people's minds. The scandal had stirred national outrage, yet both Eisenhower and General Marshall understood something crucial. Patton possessed combat abilities that would prove indispensable once the fighting became mobile and fluid. The question haunting everyone was straightforward: how could they use him without triggering another public uproar? Eisenhower's answer showed real strategic thinking. Patton would command Third Army, but that army would only activate after the invasion succeeded and troops broke through German lines. Until that moment came, Patton would serve a different and far more elaborate purpose. He would become the centerpiece of history's most sophisticated military deception. Operation Fortitude aimed to convince German intelligence that the Allies planned their main assault somewhere completely different from where it would actually occur. The strategy was elegantly simple. The Germans must believe the primary invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais, that narrow stretch of the English Channel representing the shortest crossing and seemingly the obvious choice for any commander planning an assault across water. In reality, the Allies would land on the beaches of Normandy, which offered superior landing grounds and more room to maneuver inland. But crucially, German commanders had to keep believing Calais was the true target, even as American and British soldiers stormed ashore in Normandy. Making this deception convincing meant creating something that didn't actually exist. The Phantom Army took the designation First United States Army Group, abbreviated FUSAG. It had no real divisions, no genuine troops, no physical substance whatsoever. It lived only in fabricated radio messages, in fake equipment scattered around Dover and across southeastern England, and in intelligence reports from German spies who were actually British agents working under Allied control. Yet FUSAG needed a commander. That commander had to be someone whose appointment would make strategic sense and whose reputation would lend credibility to the threat. Only one officer fit that requirement. Patton, sidelined by controversy but recognized throughout the German High Command as the Allies' most formidable battle commander, became FUSAG's commanding general in early 1944. The Germans swallowed it entirely. German intelligence services, both the Abwehr and the SD, poured enormous resources into monitoring FUSAG's movements and preparations. They collected photographs of dummy landing craft constructed from scaffolding and canvas. They intercepted radio traffic from mobile units pretending to represent 11 divisions that existed only on paper. They received reports from supposedly independent agents, unaware these operatives were under British direction through the double-cross system. Most persuasive of all, they observed Patton himself touring installations, delivering speeches, conferring with subordinate commanders. Every piece of intelligence confirmed the same picture: Patton commanded a massive force assembling for invasion at Calais. This deception worked because it made logical sense to German commanders. Calais represented the shortest sea route, merely 20 miles versus Normandy's 100-mile crossing. Calais offered the most direct path toward Germany and the crucial Ruhr industrial complex. But most importantly, they understood that Patton was the Allies' supreme tactical commander. When German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt later reflected on Allied commanders, he stated plainly that Patton was their best. General Erwin Rommel had studied Patton's North African campaigns closely. Hitler himself reportedly called him that crazy cowboy, a phrase mixing contempt with grudging acknowledgement of dangerous capability. German reasoning followed inexorable logic. The Allies would naturally commit their finest combat commander to the main invasion, not some secondary operation. Therefore, wherever Patton was positioned, that's where the real assault would come. The deception even included an audacious stroke. General Hans Kramer, who had commanded a panzer division in North Africa before capture in May 1943, was being sent home due to failing health. Before his May 1944 departure, British intelligence orchestrated a dinner between Kramer and Patton. Throughout that evening, Patton played his role as FUSAG commander, steering conversation toward Calais and invasion preparations. After dinner concluded, British escorts drove Kramer through southern England. Road markers indicated southeastern locations near Dover. In reality, he was traveling through southwestern England, observing the actual Overlord assembly, but the deception was flawless. When Kramer eventually reached neutral Sweden and reported to German intelligence, his account confirmed everything Germans already believed. Patton commanded an enormous force, preparing to strike at Calais. While Patton performed his role as a phantom commander, Eisenhower worked brutal hours preparing the real invasion. He relocated his operational headquarters to Telegraph Cottage outside London, isolating himself from constant disruptions so he could concentrate on final preparations. He personally visited every division designated for the assault, walking among soldiers, speaking to men from different units, projecting unwavering confidence, building trust that extended from commanders down to riflemen. By June 1944, he had visited all American, British, and Canadian assault units slated for the beaches, frequently spending entire afternoons in conversation with men who would soon follow his orders. Soldiers felt something authentic in his manner and genuine concern for their welfare. They recognized not a distant figure, but a leader who comprehended the magnitude of what he was asking them to do. These visits gave Eisenhower opportunities to make the most consequential decisions any commander faces. He authorized the airborne assault despite military advisors predicting 70% casualties among paratroops dropping behind enemy lines in darkness. He understood the terrible risk this represented, but he also recognized that without those airborne divisions securing the flanks, the entire operation could collapse under German counterattack. He wrestled with the weather itself as June 5th approached. The invasion had been scheduled for that date, but terrible storms rolled across the channel with no improvement in sight. His meteorologists offered a glimmer of hope, predicting a narrow window of better conditions on June 6th, after which worse weather would return. If the assault didn't launch on the 6th, postponement meant waiting 2 additional weeks for favorable tides and moon phases to align again, or possibly waiting until July. Every day of delay carried risks. Security would deteriorate as thousands of soldiers knew the secret. Germans would gain time to strengthen their already formidable defenses. Eisenhower made his decision. The invasion would proceed on June 6th. Years later, he would write that it was the loneliest decision of his entire life. On the evening of June 5th, as soldiers boarded landing craft and pilots prepared their aircraft for takeoff, Eisenhower traveled to an airfield near Newbury, where the 101st Airborne Division waited. These paratroopers would drop into darkness hours before dawn, securing bridges and capturing crucial road junctions. Military projections anticipated savage casualties among them. Eisenhower walked among these men, speaking softly, exchanging jokes about fishing, asking about their hometowns and families. A photograph from that night captured an unforgettable moment, Eisenhower speaking with Lieutenant Wallace Strobel, tension etched into the young officer's face, the weight of impending combat visible in every line of his expression. After departing that airfield, Eisenhower returned to his headquarters. There he composed a message accepting complete responsibility if the operation failed. He folded it carefully, placing it in his pocket, prepared to release it should the invasion collapse. The message was stark. Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air and the navy, did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. June 6, 1944 broke with clearing skies spreading across the English Channel. At 6:30 in the morning, American, British and Canadian soldiers charged across 5 beaches positioned along 50 miles of Normandy coastline. The assault force included nearly 7,000 vessels of every description, from massive warships to small landing craft to transport ships and supply vessels. More than 11,000 aircraft roared overhead, providing continuous support. By the time darkness fell, approximately 156,000 Allied soldiers had established themselves on French soil. The cost reached roughly 10,000 casualties, with Omaha Beach absorbing the heaviest American losses, where German resistance nearly succeeded in driving attackers back into the sea. Yet the invasion held. By midnight, Allied forces possessed their beachheads. Western Europe's liberation had begun. Eisenhower's meticulous preparation and diplomatic skill had produced victory. The expanded assault front along those 50 miles prevented German forces from concentrating overwhelming power at any single point. The airborne operations, despite scattered drops and heavy losses, bewildered German commanders and delayed their ability to shift reserves to threatened areas. Naval gunfire from offshore warships provided essential assistance to infantry struggling against fierce resistance. Air superiority meant German aircraft never appeared over the beaches. And most critically, the deception remained intact. As desperate fighting consumed Normandy, Hitler refused to release his armored reserves, convinced the real invasion would still materialize at Calais. The German 15th Army sat near Calais, waiting for Patton. For 7 full weeks following D-Day, considerable German forces remained positioned near Calais, instead of reinforcing desperate units in Normandy. British double agents, particularly Juan Pujol Garcia, operating under the codename Garbo, continued transmitting messages through German intelligence channels describing Fusag's ongoing preparations and offering explanations for why the Calais invasion kept being delayed. Hitler accepted these reports as genuine. He maintained powerful armored divisions at Calais that might have devastated the Normandy beachhead had they been deployed there. The Allies had anticipated the deception would yield perhaps 2 weeks of advantage. It delivered 7 weeks. Every German division anchored at Calais represented 1 fewer tank, 1 fewer soldier, 1 fewer gun available to crush the Allied foothold in Normandy, a strategic dividend worth countless tactical successes on the battlefield. Patton discovered the Normandy invasion the same way millions did elsewhere, through BBC radio broadcasts on the morning of June 6. His reaction was one of profound disappointment. He understood intellectually his essential role in the deception strategy. He recognized his significance to the overall plan. Yet emotionally, he felt he was being left behind. Forced to watch from the sidelines as history unfolded without him, he wrote to his wife Beatrice expressing his anguish. "It is hard to be on the sidelines and see all the glory eluding me. But I guess there will be enough for all." To his son George, enrolled at West Point, he confided, "This group of unconquerable heroes whom I command are not in yet, but we will be soon. I wish I was there now, as it is a lovely sunny day for a battle, and I am fed up with just sitting." Yet Patton's absence became his supreme achievement. His fame alone, his assignment as phantom commander of an imaginary army, constrained German reserves and persuaded Hitler that Normandy was merely a feint. History would record a profound irony. Patton achieved his most strategically vital victory in a battle where he participated not at all. His reputation, brilliantly exploited through Allied intelligence and Eisenhower's strategic vision, accomplished more than entire divisions maneuvering across a battlefield. His mere presence in England, his phantom army, his reputation for boldness, all combined to shape the invasion's outcome more decisively than any tactical maneuver. On August 1, 1944, following 2 months of brutal combat across Normandy, Patton's Third Army officially transitioned into operational status. The moment he had anticipated had finally arrived. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, had finally fractured German defensive positions west of St. Lo. Through that rupture poured Patton's armored formations in a campaign defined by speed and relentless aggression that astounded the German command structure. Patton unleashed tactics he had refined across decades of military study. His divisions moved faster than German commanders considered possible, appearing in unexpected locations, surrounding German units before they could regroup or escape. Third Army's advance across France became the stuff of military legend. Patton's forces raced westward into Brittany, then pivoted eastward toward Paris, then wheeled northeastward toward Germany itself. By August 25, American soldiers were entering the streets of Paris. By month's end, Third Army had liberated most of Brittany, sealed the Falaise pocket, and trapped German forces within it, captured numerous towns and thousands of enemy soldiers. Patton's armored divisions moved so swiftly that airborne commanders complained he kept overrunning the drop zones they had planned. In 30 days, Third Army covered distances that planners had estimated would require 6 months of continuous advance. This extraordinary momentum finally halted at the end of August, when supply lines simply couldn't sustain the pace. Fuel consumption exceeded what transport could deliver by staggering amounts. Eisenhower confronted a strategic decision. He could concentrate all available fuel and supplies on Patton, enabling Third Army to drive deep into German territory while other forces remained stationary. Alternatively, he could distribute resources across all armies, allowing steady progress everywhere, but preventing any dramatic deep penetration. Eisenhower selected the broad front strategy, reasoning it offered greater safety and better prospect of enduring success. Patton reacted with fury, insisting he could have reached Berlin before Christmas if supplies had been prioritized to his army. Decades later, historians still debated the merits of broad front versus concentrated thrust, but Eisenhower's decision reflected his broader responsibility for the entire campaign, rather than the ambitions of any single commander. In December 1944, Eisenhower's strategic judgment faced its ultimate test when Germany launched one final massive offensive. Hitler had secretly mobilized enormous forces for a desperate assault through the Ardennes forest, wagering everything on a wild gamble to split Allied armies and recapture Antwerp. On December 16th, 3 German armies smashed into American positions held by stretched-thin units. The ensuing Battle of the Bulge created a genuine crisis demanding Eisenhower's finest performance as supreme commander. Within hours, Eisenhower was orchestrating the Allied response. He grasped immediately that while the German attack was dangerous, it also presented an opportunity if handled correctly. German forces were advancing beyond their supply lines, leaving themselves exposed to counterattack. Eisenhower dispatched reinforcements to critical sectors, surrendered ground where militarily prudent to preserve forces, and coordinated American, British, and French units to contain the German penetration. Most importantly, he turned to Patton with what seemed an impossible task. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastogne, a vital crossroads town. Should Bastogne fall, German forces could advance westward toward Antwerp. Eisenhower needed Patton to disengage from his current operations, pivot Third Army 90 degrees northward, and drive into the southern shoulder of the German Bulge to rescue Bastogne. On December 19th, Eisenhower met with Patton and General Omar Bradley at Verdun to coordinate the response. When Eisenhower asked when Patton could attack, Patton answered confidently he could move on December 22nd. Eisenhower, skeptical that an entire army could redeploy in such compressed time, dismissed the estimate as absurd. But Patton wasn't exaggerating. Patton had seen it coming. His intelligence chief, Colonel Oscar Koch, had carefully studied the enemy's movements and predicted exactly what the Germans would attempt. Patton's team had already begun working up backup plans, ready to shift operations on a moment's notice. Back at his headquarters in Nancy, he wasted no time. One quick call to his chief of staff, one code word spoken, and the contingency plan they'd prepared in advance sprang into action. Third Army executed one of history's most impressive and demanding maneuvers. On December 22nd, Patton pivoted 3 divisions north, driving them hard toward Bastogne through heavy snow and frozen terrain. The conditions were brutal. German opposition was fierce. Supplies ran dangerously low. Yet Third Army pushed forward relentlessly. By December 26th, breakthrough came. Elements of the 4th Armored Division carved through enemy lines and reached Bastogne, finally connecting with the isolated paratroopers who'd been holding out there. More reinforcements poured in behind them. As January drew to a close, the Allied forces had done it. They'd driven the Germans back to where they'd started. The Bulge was gone. Germany's final desperate gamble had collapsed. The Battle of the Bulge revealed something fundamental about military excellence. Eisenhower provided the overarching strategic vision, coordinating the entire Allied response across multiple fronts. He made the crucial decisions about where to hold and where to attack. Patton contributed the aggressive execution at the tactical level, pulling off maneuvers that other commanders thought simply couldn't be done. Together, these two formed something exceptional, each supplying what the other lacked. By March 1945, Allied columns were already crossing the Rhine and pushing deep into German territory. On March 1st, Third Army captured Trier. The exchange that followed became legendary. When Eisenhower's headquarters radioed that Trier should probably be bypassed because taking it would demand 4 divisions, Patton's reply came back instantly. He'd taken Trier with 2 divisions. Did they want him to hand it back? That message captured Patton perfectly. His unshakable confidence, his refusal to accept limits, others accepted. From March into May, Third Army raced across Germany with stunning speed. They liberated Ohrdruf concentration camp, becoming the first American forces to reach such a place. Patton ordered local German civilians to walk through it, to see with their own eyes what had been done there. His army swept up hundreds of thousands of prisoners, made contact with Soviet forces pushing from the east, and drove deep into Czechoslovakia until orders came to stop. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Third Army had compiled a remarkable record. From August 1, 1944 through May 8, 1945, Patton's army had liberated or conquered roughly 81,500 square miles across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. They'd taken in the region of 1.28 million prisoners and inflicted approximately 500,000 casualties against German forces. Third Army's own losses, though considerable, ran proportionally lower than other Allied armies, which proved the correctness of Patton's approach. Aggressive offense meant destroying enemy capability before they could organize strong resistance, ultimately saving American lives. Yet none of this would have been possible without Eisenhower's leadership guiding everything. His organizational genius had planned and carried out the invasion itself. His ability to work with different nations and different personalities held the alliance together through constant pressure and crises. His strategic grasp extended from the beaches of Normandy all the way to the Elbe River. He managed difficult men, Montgomery's arrogance, de Gaulle's prickly nationalism, Patton's impulsiveness, keeping these personalities in balance without letting them fracture what they'd built together. He made the hard calls, approving risky operations, deciding when to launch despite less than perfect conditions, coordinating rapid responses to unexpected developments. These qualities made him the only conceivable choice for Supreme Commander. The question about why America's greatest combat general had been kept away from commanding D-Day itself made sense once you understood what D-Day actually required. Overlord wasn't won by the best battlefield tactician. It needed someone who could hold everything together, who understood diplomacy, who could think strategically about something this enormous and complex. Patton was undoubtedly America's finest tactical general, possibly the greatest the war produced, but Overlord demanded something different entirely. It required orchestrating a massive coalition operation, balancing what different nations wanted and needed, thinking across entire continents strategically, and keeping trust alive between different governments and different military services. Eisenhower brought exactly these abilities. Patton didn't. The slapping incidents weren't just unfortunate missteps. They pointed to something deeper in Patton's character, his inability to master his temper, his tendency to act on impulse before thinking, his lack of political sense. These traits might work at corps or army level, but they disqualified someone from the top position where diplomatic navigation and maintaining political support mattered as much as military strategy. Roosevelt's preference for Eisenhower over Marshall showed even deeper wisdom. Marshall would have made a strong supreme commander. His organizational abilities had no equal. His strategic mind was sharp and penetrating. His reputation stood beyond reproach, but Marshall's real strength lay where Roosevelt placed him, in Washington, managing the global war effort, handling Congress, coordinating between different theaters, ensuring the political and logistical support that made victories possible. Moving Marshall to Europe would have solved one problem while creating another. Having Eisenhower in Europe and Marshall in Washington turned out to be the perfect arrangement. Meanwhile, Patton, despite being held back from Supreme Command and from D-Day, found exactly where he belonged. His tactical gift and his aggressive nature were precisely what mobile warfare needed once the invasion succeeded and the breakthrough came. Third Army's results proved everything people claimed about Patton. He was genuinely America's greatest combat general, the commander whose name made German soldiers' hearts sink. But he served under Eisenhower, implementing a strategic vision that both Eisenhower and Marshall had helped shape, playing his essential part in a larger plan requiring different talents at different levels. What happened with these command decisions mattered far beyond just World War II. Eisenhower's achievements established new thinking about military leadership for the modern age. He demonstrated that today's warfare demands more than just tactical brilliance. It requires managing large organizations, understanding politics, handling diplomacy skillfully, and thinking across strategies. These became defining qualities for top military leaders in the years that followed. The way the American military emphasizes combined operations between services, coalition warfare, and strategic thinking rather than purely tactical performance traces directly back to lessons from Eisenhower's example. Later, Eisenhower transformed his military standing into a political career, serving as president from 1953 to 1961. His years in office reflected the same strengths that had made him so effective as supreme commander. He organized things well, thought strategically, built coalitions, and navigated difficult problems while keeping the big picture in view. He brought the Korean War to an end, managed Cold War tensions without stumbling into nuclear disaster, and created policies that guided American strategy for many years ahead. His presidency showed that the abilities needed for top military command translated smoothly into the highest civilian leadership position. Patton never received such an opportunity. After Germany fell in May 1945, he took on military governor duties in Bavaria. Trouble found him quickly. He resisted pushing hard against former Nazi officials. He made comments suggesting ex-Nazi party members could fill government jobs. He talked about the Allies needing to immediately take on the Soviet Union. Washington heard about these statements. The press got hold of them. Criticism came down hard. Eisenhower, feeling the political pressure, removed Patton from Third Army Command in October 1945. Then, on December 8, 1945, tragedy struck. Near Mannheim, Patton's staff car collided with an American truck. The crash broke his neck, leaving him unable to move his body from the neck down. They rushed him to Heidelberg Hospital, but the doctors had nothing they could do. 12 days later, on December 20, 1945, Patton died. Pulmonary edema and heart failure took him. He was 60. They buried him in the American cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers he'd led into battle. A simple white cross marks his grave, identical to all the others standing in neat rows. Marshall went on to other work after the war ended, service of tremendous weight and consequence. President Truman sent him to China in 1945 as special envoy, trying to broker peace between nationalists and communists. That effort didn't work out, but Marshall learned things about Asia that shaped America's path. In 1947, Truman named him Secretary of State. From that position, Marshall laid out a vision for European recovery in a Harvard speech on June 5, 1947. The plan took his name, the Marshall Plan, and it transformed the continent. America poured over $12 billion in aid across 4 years, helping 16 nations rebuild from the wreckage of war. The Marshall Plan stopped economic collapse dead in its tracks, created prosperity that made communism less appealing, and announced to the world that America led in the post-war order. Its importance in winning the peace equaled what D-Day had accomplished in winning the war. Marshall served briefly as Secretary of Defense during Korea's conflict, then stepped away in 1951. In 1953, the Nobel Peace Prize went to him for the Marshall Plan. He became the one professional soldier ever to win it. When he died on October 16, 1959, at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, he was 78. Arlington National Cemetery received him with full military honors. President Truman came to the funeral. Later, he said Marshall was the greatest American still living. These three extraordinary men, Eisenhower, Marshall, and Patton, their leadership defined how the Allies won World War II. Each brought something essential that the others couldn't provide. Marshall supplied the strategic direction and worldwide coordination from Washington. Eisenhower handled the on-the-ground execution and kept the coalition from falling apart in Europe. Patton delivered tactical brilliance and the aggressive power to break through and pursue. No single one achieves victory alone, but each serving where his particular strengths mattered most, they became unbeatable. Roosevelt's discernment in seeing which role suited which man proved decisive. The choice to keep America's greatest combat general off D-Day proved absolutely correct. D-Day succeeded because of flawless organization, not because of tactical genius on the battlefield. The invasion meant managing millions of separate details across multiple military branches and multiple nations. It demanded the diplomatic touch to smooth over coalition friction. It needed strategic thinking to connect the invasion to the larger conflict. It required patience, waiting for the right moment, and bravery to proceed when circumstances were merely adequate rather than ideal. These were Eisenhower's gifts. Patton's talents showed their worth later, when breakthrough became possible and mobile warfare determined everything. Putting Patton in a deception role before D-Day, and as a combat commander afterward, showed perfect understanding of how to position each general where his abilities would do the most good. The true arithmetic of winning didn't count who was the fiercest fighter. It counted who managed complex operations best. Not who conquered individual battles, but who orchestrated coalition warfare successfully. Not who terrified the enemy, but who maintained trust among difficult allies. By that measure, Eisenhower stood alone as the choice for supreme command. Patton was vital as a tactical commander. Marshall was vital in his strategic role. Yet for the particular challenge of designing and executing D-Day, then directing the campaign from Normandy to Berlin, Eisenhower had precisely the right mix of capabilities. When Roosevelt selected Eisenhower ahead of both Marshall and Patton, he showed the strategic thinking that defined his whole approach to war. He grasped that military organizations, like any complex human system, need different strengths at different positions. The qualities that make a strong company commander aren't the qualities needed at division level. The qualities needed at division level differ from corps level, and the qualities needed at the very top differ again. Roosevelt saw that Overlord required supreme organizational and diplomatic strength more than supreme tactical skill. He chose based on that understanding. The consequence was Western Europe's liberation and Nazi Germany's defeat. When Allied soldiers charged onto Normandy's beaches on June 6, 1944, they moved under a command structure precisely fitted to what the moment demanded. Eisenhower's organizational mastery had attended to every detail. His diplomatic capability had held the alliance together. His strategic vision had found the right path forward. Marshall stood in Washington providing resources and the political backing necessary. Patton stayed in England as a deception, his reputation alone keeping German troops pinned down. Later, when Patton finally entered the fighting 2 months in, his tactical mastery capitalized on what Eisenhower's planning had made possible. History's greatest military operation succeeded because Roosevelt made the right decision about command. America's greatest combat general stood back from D-Day, not because of any weakness, but because that operation called for something different. Roosevelt's choice of Eisenhower over Patton for the top role reflected something profound: that winning modern conflicts means matching the right capabilities to the specific demands. Patton earned his place in history, leading the breakout across France, relieving Bastogne, driving through Germany. But D-Day belonged to Eisenhower, whose organizational mastery, diplomatic ability, and strategic thinking made the 20th century's greatest military achievement possible. Sidelining Patton wasn't rejection. It was recognition that the highest command needed different talents. Talents Eisenhower possessed abundantly. Both men, positioned where their unique strengths had maximum effect, contributed crucially to Allied victory. The rightness of Roosevelt's decision shows in the results. Europe freed from tyranny, democracy planted across the continent, 8 decades of peace that followed. That inheritance stands as proof of a fundamental truth about leadership. Real excellence requires more than courage and tactical skill. It requires the wisdom to place the right person in the right position at the right moment. Roosevelt had that wisdom. His decision about Patton and Eisenhower and D-Day altered military history and remade the world.